She was supposed to be invisible. Amber Rogers, 23 years old, art history genius turned waitress, had one job at Il Palazzo: serve the wine, clear the plates, and disappear. But tonight, in the restaurant's most exclusive private suite, Fabiano Pinto, New York's most feared mafia boss, is about to sign a $150 million contract to reclaim his family's ancestral Sicilian estates. The document looks perfect. The experts swear it's authentic. The ink is right, the age is right, the seal is right. Except it isn't. And Amber, standing in the shadows with a water pitcher and a photographic memory for Renaissance iconography, has exactly one chance to do the impossible: speak 6 words in Sicilian that will stop a catastrophic fraud, expose a deadly conspiracy, and reveal that the invisible waitress in the corner knows more about his heritage than his own historians. November Rain in Manhattan was theatrical, the kind that made the city look like it belonged in a film noir. On East 57th Street, where Bentleys idled at red lights and doormen wore white gloves year-round, Il Palazzo rose 5 stories of limestone and old-world power. To call it a restaurant was technically accurate but spiritually insufficient. Il Palazzo was where oligarchs brokered deals, where senators made backroom agreements, where conversations that never appeared in official records happened over $400 bottles of wine. The dress code wasn't posted, because if you had to ask, you didn't belong. And moving through this temple of power every evening, carrying trays and wearing a uniform that might as well have been camouflage, was Amber Rogers. At 23, Amber had become an expert at erasure. Her dark hair was always pulled back so tightly it made her temples throb. Her uniform, white button-down, black vest, black slacks, was always pristine. Her expression was always pleasant, but blank. She moved through the dining room like water, filling gaps, anticipating needs, never drawing attention. She was invisible by necessity, because if anyone looked too closely, they might recognize her. 3 years ago, Amber Rogers had been the youngest person to ever receive the Wyeth Fellowship in Italian Renaissance Studies. Her undergraduate thesis on forgery techniques in 16th-century papal documents had been published in 2 academic journals. She'd been offered research positions at the Met, the Frick, and the Getty. Then her mother got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Dr. Elena Rogers didn't believe in 6-month prognoses. She believed in experimental treatments that cost $40,000 a month and weren't covered by insurance. Amber had made a choice. The fellowships paid $35,000 a year. Il Palazzo's servers made that in 3 months, so she'd disappeared, ghosted her academic advisors, stopped answering emails from Christie's and Sotheby's, put her degrees in a drawer and put on an apron instead. That was 3 years ago. Her mother was still alive, stubbornly, expensively alive, and Amber was still invisible. Until tonight. Rogers, Mr. Benedetti, the restaurant's general manager, had the kind of voice that could curdle hollandaise. Private suite, 3rd floor, 7 o'clock. Fabiano Pinto does not tolerate mistakes. The name meant nothing to Amber, which meant she'd been successfully invisible for 3 years. Kitchen staff knew better. The sous chef had crossed himself when he heard. At 6:45 p.m., Amber presented herself at the 3rd floor security checkpoint. A man built like a concrete wall scanned her with a metal detector, checked her ID, and gestured her through without a word. The private suite was breathtaking. Coffered ceilings, silk wallpaper, windows overlooking the city like a kingdom. A single table, set for 7, dominated the space. At 7 p.m. exactly, Fabiano Pinto arrived. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, with the kind of physical presence that made expensive suits look like armor. Dark hair, dark eyes, Mediterranean features that belonged in a Caravaggio painting. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. With him came an entourage, an older man with steel-gray hair, a woman in her 40s carrying a briefcase, 2 younger men who were clearly security despite their tailored suits. Amber poured water, still, not sparkling, and vanished into the corner. At 7:15, the guests arrived. Richard Sterling, American, 50s, expensive suit, smile like a predator. With him was Dr. Giulia Santoro, a severe Italian woman clutching a leather portfolio like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Mr. Pinto." Sterling's voice was warm whiskey and cold calculation. "Tonight will be historic." Fabiano's handshake was brief. "Show me." Dr. Santoro placed her portfolio on the table with ceremonial gravity. Inside, nestled in archival foam, was a document that made Amber's breath catch. Parchment, genuine, yellowed, covered in dense handwritten Italian. A large wax seal at the bottom, crimson and ornate. "The Pinto Grant of 1485, Dr. Santoro announced, signed by Pope Innocent VIII, confirming your family's hereditary rights to the Castello di Monteverde estates in Sicily, authenticated by the Vatican Archives, the University of Bologna, and the Sicilian Historical Society." Amber was supposed to be arranging bread plates. Instead, every cell in her body had gone on high alert. She knew that papal seal. She'd spent 6 months studying Innocent VIII's bulls for her thesis. She could draw that seal from memory. And something about it was wrong. Sterling continued smoothly. "With this document, you have legal standing to reclaim estates worth an estimated $300 million. All you need is to sign the contract and transfer the purchase price." The older man, Russo, leaned forward, studied the parchment through reading glasses. "Sembra autentico." It seems authentic, because it was authentic. The parchment was real 15th century vellum. The ink was real period iron gall. Even the wax was genuine 15th century beeswax. But the document itself was wrong. Amber had studied Innocent VIII's papal bulls obsessively. His seals used a specific format, crossed keys beneath the 3-tiered tiara. The gold key always faced dexter, right from the viewer's perspective. This seal showed the gold key facing sinister, left. It was microscopic, the kind of detail even experts might miss, the kind of mistake that happened when forgers worked from photographs without understanding heraldic conventions. Someone had taken a genuine 15th century blank document and added fraudulent text, then sealed it with a technically correct but symbolically wrong seal. It was brilliant. Nearly perfect, a $150 million lie. Fabiano picked up a fountain pen, heavy, gold, the kind that signed treaties. "Once you sign and transfer the funds," Sterling said, sliding papers forward, "the document is legally yours." The pen hovered over paper. Amber had 3 seconds to decide who she was going to be. The invisible waitress who kept her head down, or the scholar who couldn't watch a masterpiece fraud happen without speaking. Her mother's voice, weak from chemo but fierce. "Truth matters, Amber. When it stops mattering, we stop being human." The pen touched paper. "Aspetti un momento." "Wait a moment." Her voice was barely a whisper, but in that room's silence it was a gunshot. Everyone turned. Security hands moved toward jackets. Sterling's smile froze. Dr. Santoro looked confused, and Fabiano Pinto, very slowly, put down the pen and turned to look at her. His expression was unreadable. His voice was soft, dangerous. "Ci sei tu? Who are you?" Amber's heart hammered. Her hands shook. Her entire life was about to implode. But the fraud on that table couldn't stand. She stepped forward, out of the shadows, out of invisibility. "I'm the waitress," she said. Then, switching to Sicilian, the dialect her mother had taught her, the language of truth. "E questo documento è un zornu." And this document is a fraud. The room erupted. Sterling shouted. Dr. Santoro gasped. Security moved. But Fabiano held up one hand. Everyone froze. He stared at Amber like she was a puzzle. "Spiega." "Explain." "The seal," Amber said, voice steadier now. "Pope Innocent VIII's seal. The gold key should face dexter, right from the viewer's perspective. Standard heraldic protocol for 15th century papal bulls. Your seal shows it facing sinister. It's a real seal, probably period correct, but it's diocesan, not papal. Someone took a genuine blank document, added fraudulent text, and sealed it with the wrong seal." Crystalline silence. Then Fabiano smiled, sharp, dangerous. "E come lo sai?" And how do you know this? Amber took a breath. Because before I started serving your water, I spent 4 years studying papal forgery at Columbia. My mother authenticated manuscripts for the Vatican before she got sick. That seal is wrong. Fabiano turned to Dr. Santoro. Is she right? The doctor's hands trembled as she examined the document. Finally, barely audible. See, the gold key? It faces left. The temperature dropped. Fabiano picked up the document, studied it, then set it down gently. He turned back to Amber. What's your name? Amber Rogers. Amuretta. Little love, in Sicilian. Sit. Mr. Pinto. Sentati. Not a request. Amber sat. Fabiano gestured to Russo. Take them to the basement. Find out who they're working for. Within seconds, Sterling and Santoro were gone, their protests fading. Fabiano poured wine, slid a glass to Amber. You just saved me $150 million and probably my life. He lifted his glass. Drink. Amber's hands shook, but she drank. It was exceptional. For 3 years, Fabiano said, you've been invisible. Tonight you stepped into the light. Why? Because the truth mattered more than safety. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect. What do you want, Amber Rogers? My job back. My mother's treatment is in 2 weeks. Basta. He pulled out his phone, typed. You don't work for Benedetti anymore. You work for me. Authentication, collections, finding lies. He leaned forward. I need someone who sees what others miss. I'm not a criminal. Neither am I. Officially. His smile was sharp. How much does it pay? His lawyer slid over a paper. The number made Amber choke. Per week, Fabiano clarified. Plus full medical coverage. Any treatment, any doctor, anywhere. What's the price? Loyalty. Truth, even when inconvenient. His eyes held hers. Can you do that? Amber thought of her mother, the bills, 3 years of invisibility. Thought of the rush when truth met power and power listened. Yes. Fabiano extended his hand. Benvenuta nella famiglia, Amuretta. Welcome to the family. Outside, rain had stopped. The city glittered, and Amber Rogers, invisible for 3 years, was finally, terrifyingly, gloriously seen. 3 days after Amber Rogers stopped being invisible, she found herself in a penthouse suite that made Il Palazzo look like a subway station. Fabiano's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building in Tribeca that officially belonged to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The windows offered a view of Manhattan that looked like a particularly ambitious CGI rendering, all glittering towers and impossibly clean streets. The furniture was the kind of mid-century modern that cost more than most people's mortgages. Everything was cream and chrome and cold perfection, except for the conference room, which looked like a bunker had married a museum. The walls were lined with climate-controlled glass cases displaying artifacts that probably shouldn't exist outside of the Uffizi. A Bellini sketch, what looked suspiciously like a lost Titian study, a Byzantine icon that Amber was fairly certain had been listed as missing since 1943. She didn't ask. That was Rule 1 of her new employment. Don't ask where things come from. The table itself was a slab of black walnut that could have doubled as a landing strip, surrounded by 12 leather chairs that probably cost more than her Columbia tuition. At the head sat Fabiano, dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a Renaissance portrait titled Portrait of Power Personified. Around him, Russo, the consigliere, looking like everyone's dangerous uncle. Elena, the lawyer, with her tablet and her expression of permanent calculation. 2 bodyguards whose names Amber didn't know and suspected she wasn't supposed to ask. And Marco, a translator who spoke 6 languages and had the energy of a particularly nervous rabbit. And then there was Amber, sitting 3 seats down from Fabiano, wearing a dove-gray dress that Elena had somehow acquired in her exact size within 18 hours, trying very hard to look like she belonged in a room where the coffee service probably cost more than her mother's monthly medications. Who even buys castles on a Tuesday? she thought, watching Fabiano review documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon approaching a particularly complicated operation. And why does he look like he's about to negotiate a treaty instead of, committing what is technically several flavors of fraud? They're late, Russo growled, checking a watch that looked vintage enough to be historically significant. They're making an entrance, Fabiano replied without looking up from his papers. His voice was calm, almost bored. Sterling thinks theater is the same as credibility. Sterling. The name made Amber's stomach tighten. Richard Sterling, the broker who'd tried to sell Fabiano the fake papal bull. Fabiano had let him go after 12 hours of conversation in what Russo euphemistically called the basement interview room. Sterling had apparently provided extremely detailed information about his suppliers in exchange for keeping all his fingers. Now, somehow, Sterling was back with a new deal, a better deal. A $200 million opportunity that will change everything, according to the breathless email Elena had shown Amber that morning. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, and I'm apparently Fabiano Pinto, Amber thought. Then immediately felt guilty. She was being paid an obscene amount of money specifically to make sure he didn't get fooled twice. At precisely 2:01 p.m., the elevator chimed. The bodyguards tensed. Fabiano didn't even look up. Richard Sterling entered like he was arriving at his own coronation, all expensive cologne and capped teeth. With him was a new expert, not Dr. Santoro, who Amber suspected had been strongly encouraged to retire from the authentication business. This was Professor Edmund Ashford, 70-something, Oxford credentials, the kind of academic gravitas that came with 3 decades of published papers and a CBE from the Queen. Behind them rolled a security case the size of a small coffin. "Mr. Pinto," Sterling purred, extending his hand. Fabiano shook it with exactly the amount of pressure required to convey civility without warmth. "Thank you for this second chance. I assure you, after our misunderstanding, I've been extraordinarily careful." "Show me," Fabiano said. Professor Ashford cleared his throat with the authority of someone who'd spent his life lecturing to people who were required to listen. "Mr. Pinto, what I'm about to present represents perhaps the most significant historical document related to your family to surface in a century." "Oh good," Amber thought. "We're starting with hyperbole. That's always a great sign." With theatrical precision, Ashford unlocked the case. Inside, cushioned on burgundy velvet, lay a manuscript that made Amber's breath catch despite her cynicism. It was a bound codex, maybe 30 pages. The vellum yellowed to the color of aged cream, the binding cracked leather that had seen centuries. The cover bore an embossed seal, a crowned lion holding a sword, surrounded by text in elaborate Gothic script. "The Pinto Codex," Ashford announced, compiled in 1478 by the Sicilian notary Giovanni di Messina, documenting 3 generations of land grants, marriage alliances, and papal dispensations granted to the Pinto family. This is not simply a deed. This is a genealogical and legal record that establishes your family's legitimate claim to the Duchy of Altavilla, including the fortress of Castello Nero and approximately 40,000 acres of Sicilian territory. Amber was refilling water glasses, moving with the practiced invisibility she'd honed over 3 years, but her eyes were locked on the manuscript. It was beautiful. The calligraphy was exquisite, real 15th century work. She could tell from the rhythm of the script, the way certain letters connected. The vellum was genuine, properly aged, with the subtle texture that only centuries could create. But something was wrong. "The provenance," Sterling interjected smoothly, "is impeccable. Recovered from the private library of the Marquis of Palermo, whose family served as custodians of Sicilian noble records for 4 centuries. Professor Ashford has spent 8 months on authentication." Ashford nodded with the gravity of Moses presenting the tablets. "The carbon dating places the vellum between 1465 and 1485. The ink is period-appropriate iron gall compound. The binding technique matches documented 15th century Sicilian bookmaking practices. I have molecular analysis, spectroscopic data, and comparative paleographic studies. Who needs a castle this badly? Amber wondered, watching Fabiano's face remain perfectly composed while Sterling quoted a price that had 8 figures. Wait, 40,000 acres in Sicily. That's not a castle. That's a small country with really good pasta. Russo was examining the codex now, turning pages with white-gloved hands. His expression showed grudging admiration. The script is Sicilian court style, late Quattrocento. Precisely, Ashford beamed. Note the distinctive. Amber's hand froze mid-pour. The inscription on the seal, the text surrounding the crowned lion. She'd been reading it subconsciously while trying to look like she wasn't paying attention. Sigil viem familiae de Pinto dvce Altavilae. Seal of the Pinto family, Duke of Altavilla. It was in Latin. Clean, formal, textbook Latin. And it was completely wrong. In 15th century Sicily, especially in official seals and documents related to noble families, the language wasn't pure Latin. It was a hybrid, Latin structure with Sicilian vernacular insertions, reflecting the unique cultural blend of Norman, Arab, and Italian influences that defined Sicilian nobility. A real seal from 1478 would have included Sicilian linguistic markers. It would have used DI instead of DE, would have incorporated Sicilian spelling conventions, would have shown the linguistic fingerprints of the island's complex cultural identity. This seal was written in the kind of Latin a forger would use if they'd learned it from a textbook instead of from studying actual 15th century Sicilian documents. It was a tiny thing, microscopic. The kind of detail that someone like Professor Ashford, for all his credentials and his molecular analysis, might miss if he'd spent his career studying English and Italian documents, but not specifically Sicilian ones. Amber's heart started hammering. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the water pitcher. "Don't say anything," the rational part of her brain screamed. "You've been employed for 3 days. Sterling is already suspicious of you after the Papal Bull incident. If you're wrong, you look like an idiot. If you're right, you're going to humiliate an Oxford professor and blow up a $200 million deal." Fabiano was reaching for his pen. Sterling was sliding the contract forward, his smile growing wider. "The seal is wrong," Amber's expertise insisted. "The Latin is too formal. It's a forgery." But she was 3 days into a job that paid for her mother's treatments, 3 days into not being invisible, 3 days into having a purpose beyond surviving. If you're wrong, you lose everything. Fabiano uncapped the pen. The sound seemed impossibly loud. If you're right and stay silent, you're not the scholar your mother raised. You're just another person who let a lie survive because the truth was inconvenient. The pen touched paper. Amber's mouth opened, and the room held its breath, waiting for the invisible girl to speak. "Non è vero, è falso." It wasn't true. It was fake. The words left Amber's mouth before her brain could stop them. 5 words in Italian that detonated in the conference room like a flashbang grenade. Time didn't slow. It stopped. Sterling's smile froze mid-expansion. Professor Ashford's hand, reaching to point out some detail in the manuscript, hung suspended in midair. Russo's eyes snapped to Amber with the intensity of a sniper acquiring a target. The bodyguards' hands moved toward their jackets in synchronized motion that would have been beautiful if it weren't terrifying. And Fabiano simply stopped. The pen, millimeters from paper, held perfectly still. He didn't turn around, didn't move, just stopped. The silence was so complete, Amber could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Could hear the faint hum of the climate control system. Could hear Sterling's breath catch like a man who'd just watched a grenade roll under his chair. "Oh, God," Amber thought, her entire body flooding with ice-cold adrenaline. "Oh, God, what did I just do?" Then Fabiano spoke. His voice was soft, the kind of soft that made grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit. "Chi ha parlato?" Who spoke? Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Amber's legs had turned to water. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the water pitcher to keep from dropping it. Every instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to let someone else take the blame, to disappear back into invisibility where it was safe. But she'd already jumped. Might as well enjoy the fall. "I did," she said, her voice embarrassingly unsteady. "Sir." Fabiano turned in his chair, slowly, deliberately, with the mechanical precision of a gun turret tracking a target. His eyes found hers across the table, and Amber felt like she was being examined under a microscope, or possibly through a rifle scope. "Ripeti, repeat." "I said—" Amber swallowed, her throat suddenly desert dry. "I said it's not true. It's fake." The room exploded. Sterling lunged forward, his polished veneer cracking like cheap paint. "This is outrageous. Mr. Pinto, this girl is clearly—" "Silencio." Fabiano's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. Everyone shut up instantly. His eyes never left Amber's face. "Spiega." "Explain." Amber's brain was screaming at her in several languages, none of them helpful. She was 3 days into this job, 3 days into having health insurance that covered her mother's treatments. 3 days into not eating ramen for dinner every night, and she was about to either save Fabiano $200 million or get herself killed in a creative and probably untraceable way. In for a penny, in for a homicide, she thought hysterically. "Sorry," she said, aiming for professional and landing somewhere near panic-stricken. "Bad habit. I have this compulsive need to correct people's grammar. It's very annoying at parties. I'm told I'm insufferable." Fabiano's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Possibly amusement, possibly the prelude to murder. Hard to tell. "The seal," Amber continued, gesturing with the water pitcher, because apparently her body had decided props would make this less insane. "The inscription around the lion. It's in Latin." Professor Ashford drew himself up with the offended dignity of academia under attack. "Of course it's in Latin. All noble seals of the period were written in Sicilian Latin hybrid," Amber interrupted, which was either brave or suicidal. "Not formal Latin. Sicily in the 15th century was a cultural melting pot. Norman, Arab, Italian influences. Official documents, especially noble seals, reflected that. They used Sicilian vernacular insertions. Your seal says Di Pinto, formal Latin construction. A real 15th century Sicilian seal would say Di Pinto, with Sicilian spelling conventions and linguistic markers." She set the water pitcher down because her hands were shaking too badly to hold it. "This Latin is too clean, too textbook. It's what someone would write if they learned Latin from a university course, not from studying actual 15th century Sicilian documents. The vellum might be real, the ink might be period accurate, but the language is wrong. It's a forgery using authentic materials." The silence that followed could have shattered diamonds. Sterling found his voice first. "This is absurd. Professor Ashford is one of the world's leading Italian and English manuscript experts," Amber said, her terror somehow transmuting into something that felt dangerously close to confidence. "I read your publications, Professor. They're brilliant, really. Your work on Tudor-era documents is groundbreaking, but how many Sicilian noble seals have you authenticated?" Ashford's face went from pink to crimson. "I've examined dozens of Italian documents, from Florence, Venice, Rome, not Sicilian." Amber turned to Fabiano, who was watching this exchange with the focused intensity of a predator deciding which prey was worth chasing. "Sicily isn't Italy. Not in the 15th century. Different linguistic patterns, different cultural influences, different everything. A forger working from Italian templates wouldn't know that. They'd use formal Latin because that's what Italian noble seals used, but Sicilian seals were different." Russo had picked up the codex, was examining the seal with new eyes. He pulled out a phone, typed something, waited. His expression darkened. "Capo," he said quietly. "She might be right." Sterling's mask finally slipped completely. "This is ridiculous. You're going to trust a waitress over one of Oxford's finest—" "Former waitress," Amber corrected, because apparently her survival instincts had completely abandoned her. "Current? Whatever I am now. Professional grammar pedant?" Fabiano's lips twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Then he turned to Professor Ashford with an expression that made the temperature drop 10 degrees. "Professor, did you personally verify the linguistic patterns of the seal inscription against authenticated 15th century Sicilian documents?" Ashford opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The seal matched the general stylistic patterns of the period." "That's not what I asked." The professor's shoulders sagged. "No, I did not specifically compare it to Sicilian linguistic patterns." Fabiano set down his pen with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Then we have a problem?" Sterling made one last desperate play. "Mr. Pinto, surely you're not going to allow—" "Fuori. Out." Fabiano's voice was arctic. "Take your codex, take your expert, and get out of my building before I decide that attempted fraud deserves a more permanent response than embarrassment." Sterling and Ashford scrambled for the case with the desperate energy of men who'd just been granted an unexpected stay of execution. The bodyguards escorted them to the elevator with the kind of gentle encouragement usually reserved for livestock heading to slaughter. The doors closed. The suite was suddenly devastatingly quiet. Amber realized she was still standing, still holding herself upright through sheer force of will and possibly divine intervention. Her legs felt like they were made of overcooked pasta. Fabiano turned his chair to face her fully. Russo was watching her with new respect. Elena had a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "So," Fabiano said conversationally, "you just cost me a $200 million deal?" "I just saved you from a $200 million fraud," Amber corrected, then immediately regretted it because, "Shut up, Amber, shut up. You interrupted a business negotiation." "I corrected a grammatical error. You humiliated an Oxford professor. He humiliated himself by not doing his homework." Fabiano stood, and Amber's survival instincts finally woke up and started screaming. He walked toward her with the casual grace of someone who'd never had to hurry because obstacles tended to remove themselves from his path. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to. "Amuretta," he said softly, "do you have any idea what you just did?" "Saved you money," Amber offered weakly, "demonstrated value as an employee, possibly signed my own death warrant?" He smiled then, really smiled, the kind that transformed his entire face from dangerous to devastating. "You just proved that everyone in this room, including me, is wrong to ever underestimate you again." He turned to Russo. "Double her salary. Capo, duplica, double it. And find out who's supplying these forgeries. Someone's getting very good at using authentic materials. I want to know who." Russo nodded and disappeared into his phone. Fabiano turned back to Amber. "You have a gift for making powerful men look foolish. Is that going to get me killed?" "Eventually, probably." His smile was sharp now. "But not by me. By me. You're going to get promoted." Amber's legs finally gave up the fight. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "Grazie a Dio," she muttered. "Thank God." "Don't thank God yet," Fabiano said. "Thank him when we find whoever's creating these forgeries, because tomorrow we're going hunting." And Amber realized that stopping time was easy. Living with the consequences was going to be the hard part. The office Fabiano led her to wasn't an office. It was a statement. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, furniture that belonged in a design museum, and a desk made from a single piece of black walnut that probably required its own insurance policy. Everything was sharp angles and clean lines, the aesthetic of someone who'd eliminated anything soft from their life as a matter of survival. Fabiano closed the door. The click of the lock echoed like a gunshot. Amber's newfound confidence evaporated instantly. She was alone in a room with a man whose business card probably just read, "Problem solved," in elegant serif font. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of two leather chairs facing the desk. Amber sat. The chair was obscenely comfortable, which somehow made this worse. "At least if I'm about to be murdered, I'll die with good lumbar support," she thought hysterically. Fabiano didn't sit behind the desk, the traditional power position. Instead, he sat in the chair next to hers, angled so he could watch her face, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the precise way his hair was cut, the small gold cufflinks that probably cost more than her mother's monthly medication bill. "So," he said conversationally, "Amber Rogers, Columbia graduate, Wyeth Fellow, published scholar." He paused. 3-year gap in your CV where you disappeared completely. Want to tell me why? Not particularly, Amber said, then winced. Sorry, reflex answer. My therapist says I use sarcasm as a defense mechanism. Your therapist is correct. His expression didn't change. Answer the question. Amber took a breath. My mother got sick. Cancer. The treatments weren't covered by insurance. Academic fellowships pay roughly the same as starvation wages. Il Palazzo paid actual money. Math is math. So you walked away from a brilliant career to serve wine to people who wouldn't know a Caravaggio from a calendar. I walked away from a brilliant career to keep my mother alive. Her voice came out sharper than intended. Sorry if that doesn't fit the narrative of tragic academic genius. I made a choice. I'd make it again. Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but recognition. Like he understood choices made between impossible options. And now you're working for me, he said, doing exactly what you were trained to do, making more money than you ever would have in academia, with better health care than any university would provide. He tilted his head slightly. Does that bother you? That I'm working for someone who's definitely involved in criminal enterprise? Amber asked. Or that I'm really good at it? Both. She considered lying, considered giving the answer that would make her seem morally righteous or appropriately conflicted, then decided that lying to a man who probably had people killed for less than dishonesty was strategically inadvisable. Yes, she said simply, it bothers me. But not enough to stop. My mother's alive because of the money I'm making. I can live with moral ambiguity if she can live, period. Fabiano studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a leather portfolio. He returned, opened it, and placed a document in front of her. It was old, 15th century by the look of it. Parchment, faded ink, elaborate seal. The text was in medieval Italian with Latin phrases interwoven. Read it, he said. Amber leaned forward, her scholar's brain engaging automatically. The script was challenging, abbreviated Latin mixed with vernacular Italian, the kind of hybrid that took years to learn to parse correctly. It's a land transfer, she said slowly, tracing the text with her eyes. Dated 1463, transferring ownership of, I think it's a vineyard near Montalcino from the Salvucci family to... She paused, examining a particularly elaborate signature. To someone named Pinto. Your ancestor? My great-great-great-grandfather. 13 times removed. He pointed to a section of text that was particularly faded. What does that say? Amber squinted at it. The ink had degraded badly, and someone had clearly tried to restore it at some point with less than ideal results. But underneath the damage, she could see the ghost of the original text. Con tutti I diritti, rendite e pertinenze, she read, with all rights, rents, and appurtenances, standard medieval property transfer language. She looked up at him. Why? Because I paid $3 million for that document 5 years ago, and 3 experts told me it was authentic. His expression was unreadable. Is it? Amber looked back at the parchment, her pulse quickening. This was a test. Everything was a test with him. She examined the seal more carefully, looked at the ink patterns, studied the way the text flowed. Then she noticed something. A tiny inconsistency in the spacing, a subtle difference in ink density in one section. The document is authentic, she said slowly, but it's been altered. Someone added text here. She pointed to a section near the bottom. Probably in the 18th or 19th century, the added text claims mineral rights to the property. The original document wouldn't have mentioned minerals because they weren't legally relevant until mining laws changed in the 1700s. You paid $3 million for a real document that someone enhanced to be worth more. Fabiano's expression didn't change, but she felt the shift in the room's energy, like a predator recognizing worthy prey. How can you tell? The ink in that section has a slightly different composition. You can see it under magnification. It's trying to match the original, but the chemical signature is off by maybe 50 years. Also, the handwriting is trying too hard. Forgers always try too hard to match the original hand. Real scribes make unconscious variations. This is too perfect. She sat back. So congratulations, you own an authentic 15th century land deed with fraudulent 18th century additions. It's worth maybe $500,000, not $3 million. I knew you were good, Fabiano said softly. I didn't know you were this good. Is this the part where you ask for a refund? This is the part where I realize everyone who's ever sold me historical documents is about to have a very bad week. He smiled, and it wasn't entirely friendly. Starting tomorrow, you're reviewing every acquisition I've made in the last decade. That sounds like months of work. It is. Do I get hazard pay? You get to keep breathing, which is more generous than I usually am with people who cost me $2.5 million. Technically, the person who sold you the altered document cost you that money. I just pointed it out. Don't split hairs, Amber. It's literally my job to split hairs. Also, grammatical errors, also forgeries. I'm very good at splitting things. For the first time, he actually laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire face from dangerous to almost human. You're either the bravest woman in New York or the most self-destructive. I'm academically thorough with suicidal honesty. It's a specific personality type. The moment hung between them, sharp and electric, the kind of tension that could tip either into violence or something equally dangerous. His eyes held hers, and Amber felt her breath catch. This was more than respect. This was recognition. Two people who understood that truth had a cost and paid it anyway. The door burst open. Russo stood in the doorway, phone in hand, expression grim. Capo, Spariti. They've vanished. Fabiano's face went cold. Sterling and Ashford? Both. We had men following them. They got in a car at 23rd Street. 3 blocks later, the car was empty. Professional extraction. They knew we'd come for them, Fabiano said quietly. Worse. Russo looked at Amber, then back to Fabiano. The codex they left behind? We had forensics look at it. The vellum is real, but there's a tracking device embedded in the binding. Someone wanted to know exactly where that document went. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. They weren't trying to scam me, Fabiano said slowly. They were trying to place surveillance in my collection. Or confirm your location for... The window behind Fabiano's desk suddenly sprouted a small red dot. It danced across the leather chair where he'd been sitting moments ago, searching. Then it found Amber's chest. Time stopped. Fabiano moved with inhuman speed, tackling Amber out of the chair as the window exploded in a shower of glass. The bullet passed through the space where her head had been a heartbeat earlier, burying itself in the wall with a sound like a hammer striking meat. They hit the floor hard, Fabiano covering her body with his, as 2 more shots punched through the windows, the distinctive crack thump of a suppressed rifle echoing across the water. "Jew!" Russo shouted, dropping behind the desk. "Sniper! Across the river! Building under construction!" Fabiano pulled Amber behind the desk, his body still shielding hers. She could feel his heart hammering, could smell gunpowder and expensive cologne, could hear him breathing in measured counts like he'd done this before. "You okay?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Define okay," Amber managed, her voice shaking. "I'm not shot, but I'm also being shot at. So, mixed review?" He almost smiled. Then his phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression went dark. "What?" Amber asked. He showed her the screen. A text from an unknown number. "The girl saw too much. Next time we won't miss." Amber stared at the message, her brilliant academic mind finally catching up to her current reality. Someone didn't want Fabiano to buy the forgeries. Someone wanted to know where he kept his collection, and someone had just tried to kill her to keep her quiet. "So," she said, her voice only shaking a little, "when you said this job came with hazard pay, this is what you meant, isn't it?" Fabiano's laugh was dark. "Welcome to the family business, Amuretta." Outside, sirens began to wail, and Amber Rogers realized that stopping a $200 million fraud was easy. Surviving the people who'd created it was going to be significantly harder. The thing about being shot at, Amber discovered, was that it was simultaneously exactly like the movies and nothing like them at all. In movies, bullets made elegant holes in windows, and people dove gracefully behind cover while delivering witty one-liners. In reality, the window didn't just break. It exploded in a shower of glass that sounded like 1,000 chandeliers shattering at once. The bullet didn't whistle. It made a sound like fabric ripping, followed by the meaty thunk of lead hitting plaster, and there was nothing graceful about the way Fabiano slammed her into the floor behind his desk, his body covering hers while her lungs forgot how to process oxygen. "Stai giù! Stay down!" Russo's voice cut through the chaos as another window disintegrated. He was already moving. Pulling a gun from somewhere. When did he get a gun? And barking orders into his phone in rapid-fire Italian. The bodyguards materialized like dangerous ghosts, weapons drawn, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that came from military training and probable war crimes. One was on the phone. "Edificio in costruzione, lato fiume, tiratore scelto, building under construction, riverside, sniper." The other was at the window, staying low, eyes scanning the waterfront with professional intensity. And Amber was on the floor under a Mafia boss, her cheek pressed against Italian marble that probably cost more per square foot than most people's cars, her brain simultaneously screaming, "You're going to die, and this floor is surprisingly comfortable." "How many shots?" Fabiano's voice was calm, terrifyingly calm, like being shot at was a minor scheduling inconvenience. "3 confirmed," one of the bodyguards replied. "Calibro pesante. Professionale. Heavy caliber. Professional. Can you return fire?" "Troppo distante. 500 metri, forse più." "Too far. 500 meters, maybe more." Another shot punched through what remained of the windows, close enough that Amber felt the displaced air kiss her hair. She made a sound that was probably supposed to be a scream, but came out as more of a wheeze. "Breathe," Fabiano said quietly, his mouth near her ear. "Slow breaths. In through your nose. You're okay." "I'm being shot at," Amber gasped. "That's the literal opposite of okay. That's the dictionary definition of not okay. If you look up not okay in the thesaurus, there's probably a picture of this exact moment. You're babbling. It's a coping mechanism. Some people pray, I provide running commentary. Despite everything, the bullets, the chaos, the very real possibility of death by sniper, she heard him laugh. Quiet, brief, but genuine. "Capo," Russo called. "We need to move. Building's not secure. If there's one shooter, there could be more. Ground floor now. The elevators are death traps. Service stairs. Adesso. Now." Fabiano pulled Amber to her feet, keeping low, his hand gripping her arm with enough force to bruise. "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say, understand? Is 'please don't let me die' an acceptable response? Andiamo. Let's go." They moved in a tight formation, bodyguards front and back, Russo at point, Fabiano keeping Amber in the center like she was a particularly valuable package. They hit the service stairs at a run, their footsteps echoing in the concrete stairwell. 3 floors down, Russo's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, his expression darkening. "Merda, they've got the lobby covered. 2 men, possibly 3. Professional setup." "The kitchen exit?" Fabiano asked. "Loading dock connects to the restaurant next door, Vietnamese place. Kitchen should be active. Lots of civilians, which means they can't..." A door above them crashed open. Footsteps, heavy and fast, coming down. "Corey! Run!" They exploded through the door marked B2, Kitchen Access, into a humid corridor that smelled like lemongrass and fish sauce. The sounds of a busy restaurant kitchen hit them, clanging pots, shouted orders in Vietnamese, the hiss of woks over high flame. They burst through swinging doors into chaos, a kitchen in full dinner rush, 10 cooks in white coats moving in synchronized chaos, flames leaping from woks, steam rising from industrial pots. Everyone froze at the sight of armed men in expensive suits crashing through their prep area. FBI! Russo shouted in his best authoritative American accent, flashing something that might have been a badge or might have been a very convincing fake. Active threat. Clear the exits. To their credit, the kitchen staff reacted with the jaded efficiency of New York restaurant workers who'd probably seen weirder things during dinner service. They scattered toward the dining room, taking their knives with them. There, Fabiano pointed to a heavy metal door, the kind that led to service alleys, to dumpsters, to the behind-the-scenes Manhattan that tourists never saw. They hit the door at full speed, emerging into a rain-slick alley that looked like it had been designed specifically for dramatic chase scenes. The November rain had picked up again, turning the pavement into a mirror that reflected neon signs from the street beyond. A black Mercedes was already there, engine running. The driver, another bodyguard Amber vaguely recognized, had the back door open before they'd fully exited the building. "Dentro! Inside!" Russo shoved Amber toward the car. She dove into the back seat, Fabiano right behind her. Russo and one bodyguard piled into the front. The other bodyguard stayed behind, weapon drawn, covering their exit. The car accelerated before the doors were fully closed, tires screaming on wet pavement. Amber was thrown against Fabiano as they took the corner at a speed that was definitely illegal and possibly suicidal. "Status?" Fabiano demanded, his arm instinctively going around Amber to keep her from being thrown around the back seat like a rag doll. "2 shooters confirmed at the lobby," Russo reported, phone pressed to his ear. "Professional team. They scattered when NYPD responded to the shots fired call. Our people are tracking them, but aspetta cosa." He listened, his expression going from concern to furious. "Quando?" "What?" Fabiano's voice was deadly quiet. "Sterling and Ashford, we found them." Russo's jaw clenched. "Both dead, execution style, about an hour ago, dumped in a parking garage in Queens." The temperature in the car dropped. "So they were never the masterminds," Fabiano said slowly. "They were delivery men. And whoever hired them cleaned up loose ends the moment the deal fell through." "Which means someone knew within minutes that Amber stopped the deal," Russo added grimly. "Someone was watching, someone close." Amber's brain, running on pure adrenaline and possibly shock, finally caught up to the implications. "Wait, they tried to kill me because I spotted the forgery, which means they really, really wanted you to accept that document. Not for the money. If it was just a scam, they'd have disappeared with the deposit, but they stuck around. They sent a sniper." She looked at Fabiano. What was on that document that was worth killing for? His expression was grim. "That's the question, isn't it?" The car swerved again, taking a service road that ran along the waterfront. Through the rain-streaked windows, Amber could see the Manhattan skyline, beautiful, glittering, completely indifferent to the fact that she'd been shot at approximately 7 minutes ago. "So," she said, her voice only shaking a little, "on a scale of occupational hazard to actively planning my funeral, how worried should I be?" Fabiano looked at her, really looked at her, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "You just survived a professional assassination attempt. Most people would be crying or catatonic. Most people didn't grow up with a mother who thought appropriate dinner conversation was, 'Let's discuss the technical methods medieval poisoners used to avoid detection.'" Amber took a shaky breath. "Also, I'm absolutely going to have a breakdown later. Right now, I'm running on adrenaline and possibly shock. Ask me again in an hour when my brain remembers how to feel things." Despite everything, he smiled. "You're remarkable. I'm a disaster held together by student debt and spite." "That too." The car pulled into an underground parking garage, not a public one but the kind that required biometric access and had cameras on every surface. They descended 3 levels into concrete and fluorescent lighting. "Safe house," Russo explained, already typing on his phone. No one knows about this location except core family. We'll regroup, figure out who's trying to kill us, and plan accordingly." The car stopped. Everyone piled out with the efficient speed of people who'd done this before. Amber stumbled slightly as her legs remembered they were made of jelly, and Fabiano caught her arm. "Easy," he said quietly. "I'm fine," Amber lied. Then, because apparently near-death experiences destroyed her filter completely. "So, first date's going great. Really exceeded expectations. 5 stars, would recommend to friends." Fabiano stared at her for a beat. Then he laughed, actually laughed, the sound echoing in the concrete garage. "First date? Well, you bought me wine, we had dinner conversation, someone tried to kill us. That's basically a first date in New York, right?" "Dio mio," Russo muttered. "Capo, she's insane." "She's in shock," Fabiano corrected, but his eyes were warm. "And she's right. This is going great." He kept his hand on her arm as they walked toward an unmarked steel door. His touch was steady, grounding, the only thing keeping Amber from floating away on a cloud of terror and inappropriate humor. "Amber," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I need you to understand something. That I'm probably going to die? That you're the only person who saw what was wrong with those documents, which makes you the only witness I can trust." His expression was serious now, the humor gone. "Everyone else in my organization, my experts, my advisors, even my family, could be compromised. But you? You have no reason to lie to me. No agenda except survival and truth. That's a terrible basis for trust." "It's the only basis for trust." His grip tightened slightly. "Which means, until we find who's behind this, you don't leave my sight. Understand?" Amber should have been terrified, should have demanded to be taken home, to be released from this insane job, to be allowed to return to her safe, invisible life. Instead, she looked up at this dangerous, complicated man who just shielded her body with his own and said, "Understood." The steel door opened onto a stairwell leading down, deeper into the earth, deeper into his world, and Amber Rogers, scholar and former waitress, followed Fabiano Pinto into the dark, because the truth was worth protecting, even if it killed her. The safe house was not a house. It was a fortress disguised as luxury. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building in Battery Park City, the kind of address that didn't appear on GPS and required 3 separate security clearances just to access the elevator. The apartment itself looked like it had been designed by someone who'd watched too many spy movies and had unlimited budget to make their fantasies reality. Bulletproof windows, reinforced steel doors, a panic room hidden behind what looked like a wine cellar, and furniture that managed to be both comfortable and strategic, everything positioned with clear sightlines to entrances, nothing blocking escape routes. "Let me guess," Amber said, taking in the space with the exhausted detachment of someone whose brain had hit its maximum capacity for terror approximately an hour ago. "You have 6 of these scattered around the city, fully stocked, climate-controlled, probably with weapons caches hidden in the walls." 9, Fabiano corrected, shrugging out of his jacket. There was a tear in the sleeve where glass had caught it, a small bloodstain where a shard had nicked his arm. "And the weapons are in the floor, not the walls." "Walls are the first place people look." "Of course they are." Amber collapsed onto a leather sofa that probably cost more than a semester at Columbia. "Because I'm living in a reality where that sentence makes perfect sense now." Russo had disappeared into another room, phone permanently attached to his ear, coordinating whatever one coordinated after a professional hit team tried to murder your boss. The bodyguards were doing perimeter checks, speaking in low Italian about sightlines and extraction routes. And Amber was alone with Fabiano in a space that suddenly felt much smaller than its actual square footage. "You should clean that," she said, nodding at his arm. "It's nothing. It's bleeding. Barely. Do you have a pathological need to downplay injuries, or is this a macho Italian thing?" His lips twitched. "Both." She stood, crossed to him with the decisiveness of someone who'd spent 3 years in restaurant service and knew that men with power were basically toddlers with better suits. "Where's your first aid kit?" "Bathroom. Under the sink." "Of course it's organized. I bet your weapons cache is alphabetized too." "By caliber, actually." Amber returned with the first aid kit, which was less kit and more field hospital in a box, and pointed imperiously at a chair. "Sit." To her surprise, he did, without argument, without the alpha male posturing she'd expected. She rolled up his sleeve carefully, examining the cut. It wasn't deep, but it was messy. A jagged slice from glass, the kind that would scar if not properly treated. She cleaned it with antiseptic, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still singing in her veins. "You're good at this," he observed quietly. "My mother had chemo for 3 years. You learn field medicine pretty quickly." She applied antibiotic ointment with careful precision. "Hold still." "I am still." "You're twitching." "I don't twitch." "You're twitching like a cat that sees a laser pointer. Is it a control thing? Can't handle someone else taking charge?" His eyes met hers, dark and amused. "You're enjoying this." "Immensely. It's not often I get to boss around someone who probably has the mayor on speed dial." She finished bandaging his arm with the efficiency of a trauma nurse. "There. Try not to get shot at again for at least 24 hours. Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor." "I have a master's degree in art history, which makes me more qualified than WebMD." She sat back, suddenly aware of how close they were. "So, what now?" Fabiano stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a laptop. Not a consumer model, something hardened and serious-looking. He set it on the dining table, which was positioned with perfect sightlines to both the elevator and the emergency stairwell. Everything is strategic with him, Amber thought. Even furniture placement is tactical. "Now," he said, "we figure out who's trying to kill us, starting with every document acquisition I've made in the last 2 years. He opened the laptop, typed a password that was probably the digital equivalent of Fort Knox. "You said the forgeries were sophisticated. That means whoever's creating them has access to authentic materials, expert forgers, and detailed knowledge of my interests." "Inside job," Amber said, moving to sit beside him. The laptop screen showed a database, hundreds of entries, each documenting acquisitions, provenance, authentication reports. "Probably." His jaw tightened. "Which means someone I trust has been betraying me for months, maybe years." Amber pulled the laptop closer, scanning the entries with the focused intensity that had made her a star student. Each document was meticulously catalogued: date of acquisition, seller, authenticating expert, price paid. "Wait," she said, stopping on an entry from 8 months ago. "This one. The Medici letter you bought from that gallery in Florence. Who authenticated it?" "Elena." Fabiano's expression darkened. "My lawyer. She has a background in Renaissance art law." Amber's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more entries. "And this one, the Byzantine manuscript. Also Elena. The Venetian deed from 6 months ago. Elena again." She looked up at him. "Fabiano, she's authenticated 30% of your acquisitions in the last 2 years." The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. "She's been with me for 7 years, he said quietly. "I trust her." "Trusted," Amber corrected gently. "Past tense, because either she's incompetent, which I doubt given her credentials, or she's compromised." Fabiano stood, walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the Manhattan skyline. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glittering like scattered jewels. "My father built this empire from nothing," he said, his voice carrying a weight that had nothing to do with volume. "He came from Sicily with $200 and the kind of reputation that opened doors and closed coffins. Everything I have, every business, every connection, every dollar, I inherited from a man who trusted no one and survived because of it." He turned to face her. "And I trusted Elena, which makes me either a fool or soft. Probably both." Amber heard the pain beneath the words, The burden of legacy, of living up to a ghost, of trying to be as hard as the man who built everything while secretly wanting to be something more. "You're not soft," she said quietly. "You're careful. There's a difference. Careful people don't get betrayed by their own lawyer. Careful people hire brilliant authenticators who spot forgeries that everyone else misses." She stood, walked to him, close enough to see the fine lines of tension around his eyes. "You didn't fail, she did. And whoever's pulling her strings made one critical mistake." "What's that?" "They assumed you wouldn't hire someone smarter than your experts." Amber smiled slightly. "Surprise." He laughed, tired but genuine. "You have a gift for making disasters sound like victories." "It's a coping mechanism. I also deflect with humor and make inappropriate jokes during crisis situations." "I've noticed." They stood there, close enough to share breath, the city sparkling below them like a promise or a threat. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving something else in its wake. Awareness, connection, the kind of chemistry that happened when two people survived something terrible together. "Amber," Fabiano said quietly, "why did you stop the deal? The first one at Il Palazzo. You could have stayed quiet, kept your job. Stayed invisible." She thought about lying, about giving some noble answer about truth and integrity, but they'd been shot at together, had bled together, had run through rain-soaked alleys while people tried to kill them. They were past noble lies. "Because I spent 3 years being invisible," she said. 3 years pretending I wasn't the smartest person in every room. 3 years failing at the only thing I was ever good at, seeing the truth. And I was so scared that if I stayed silent one more time, I'd disappear completely. I'd become the ghost I was pretending to be. She swallowed hard. "I didn't speak up because it was brave. I spoke up because staying silent was a kind of death." His hand came up, cupped her face with surprising gentleness. "You're terrified. Constantly. But you do it anyway." "What choice do I have?" "Amuretta," he said softly, the Sicilian endearment that meant little love, little light. "You have every choice. You could run, disappear, go back to being invisible." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "But you won't." "How do you know?" "Because you're like me." His voice was rough now, intimate. "You'd rather die visible than live as a ghost." The moment stretched between them, electric, dangerous, inevitable. His hand was still on her face. Her heart was hammering. The space between them had become measurably smaller, though neither remembered moving. "This is a terrible idea," Amber whispered. "Probably the worst I've had all week. We're in a safe house because people are trying to kill us. Makes it worse or better. Depending on perspective." "I work for you. This violates approximately 12 HR policies." "I don't have HR." "That's not the defense you think it is." He smiled, slow, devastating, the expression of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and was doing it anyway. "Tell me to stop." She should. She absolutely should. This was insane, unprofessional, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with snipers and everything to do with the way her entire body had decided that oxygen was optional. The explosion shook the building like a giant had kicked it. The windows rattled, the lights flickered. Somewhere below them, car alarms started screaming in harmony with the sudden wail of fire alarms. Fabiano's entire demeanor changed in a heartbeat, from intimate to tactical, from almost lover to protector. He pulled Amber behind him, his body once again serving as her shield. Russo burst through the door, gun drawn. "Capo! Parking garage! Vehicle bomb! 3 floors down!" "Casualties?" "Our people are checking, but—" Russo's expression was grim. "Capo, they found us. They found the safe house." Amber's blood turned to ice. Because safe houses were supposed to be secret, known only to core family, which meant, "Inside job confirmed," Fabiano said, his voice deadly quiet. "Someone told them where we were." His jaw clenched. "How many people knew this location?" 7, Russo said. "You, me, the bodyguards." He paused. "And Elena." I called her when we changed locations. Standard protocol. The silence was absolute. Then Fabiano pulled out his phone, dialed a number, waited. When someone answered, his voice was arctic. Elena, we need to talk. Now. He hung up. Looked at Amber. The warmth from moments ago was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a man who'd just confirmed his worst suspicions. Get your things, he said quietly. We're leaving. Where are we going? His smile was sharp and absolutely terrifying. To have a conversation with my lawyer about the cost of betrayal. And Amber realized that trust, once broken, didn't just hurt. In Fabiano's world, it was lethal. They didn't make it to Elena. Elena came to them. The second safe house was in Red Hook, Brooklyn, an industrial loft that had been converted into what Amber could only describe as minimalist panic room chic. Exposed brick, steel beams, and enough surveillance equipment to make the NSA jealous. They'd been there for exactly 43 minutes when the power cut, not flickered, cut. The kind of sudden, complete darkness that was never an accident. Merda, Russo hissed, already moving. Backup generator should kick in. It didn't. They cut the gas line, Fabiano said quietly, his voice carrying that preternatural calm that Amber was beginning to recognize as his combat mode. Professional crew, they planned this. How many? Amber asked, proud that her voice only shook a little. Unknown. But they wouldn't cut power unless they had numbers. He pulled a gun from somewhere. When did he get that? And pressed it into her hands. Safety's here. Point and shoot. Aim center mass. Don't hesitate. I've never shot a gun in my life. Congratulations. Tonight you learn. He moved toward the windows, staying low. Russo? Exits? Front door's the kill zone. Fire escape on the east side, but they'll expect that. Service stairs to the roof. Glass shattered. Not from bullets this time, but from something being thrown. A bottle, trailing flame, tumbling through the darkness like a falling star. Molotov cocktail, Amber's brain supplied helpfully. Because apparently we're in a war zone now, the bottle hit the floor, exploded into flame. The industrial loft, with its exposed wood and vintage furniture, began to burn with enthusiastic efficiency. Roof, adesso, Fabiano shouted. They ran for the service stairs, but the door burst open before they reached it. 3 men, not dressed in suits, but in tactical gear, faces covered, weapons that looked military-grade, poured through. The bodyguards returned fire. The sound in the enclosed space was deafening, apocalyptic. Amber's ears rang. Her hands shook. The gun Fabiano had given her felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. One of the bodyguards went down. Not dead, she could see him moving, but bleeding, definitely bleeding. Russo was screaming orders. Fabiano was returning fire with the cold precision of someone who'd done this too many times. And Amber saw the wine rack. It was one of those pretentious industrial things, all reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs. Filled with bottles that probably cost hundreds of dollars each, bottles filled with alcohol that burned. Her mother's voice, crystal clear. Eleanor of Aquitaine defended her castle with burning oil and sheer audacity. Sometimes, Amber, the best weapon is the one nobody expects. Cover me, she shouted, not knowing if anyone could hear her over the gunfire. She ran for the wine rack, grabbed 3 bottles, heavy Bordeaux, the expensive kind, and sprinted toward where the fire was spreading. She broke 1 bottle against the floor, soaked her scarf in it, set it alight from the already burning flames. Improvised Molotov cocktail. Thank you. Misspent youth reading about medieval siege warfare. She hurled it toward the doorway where the attackers were advancing. It shattered, spread flame, forced them back with shouts of surprise. Amber! Fabiano's voice, somewhere between horrified and impressed. She made 2 more, threw them with the accuracy of someone who'd spent summers playing softball before academia consumed her life. More fire, more chaos, more time. East window! Russo shouted. Fire escape! They ran. Amber grabbed the wounded bodyguard's arm, helped him stumble toward the window. He was heavy, bleeding, muttering prayers in Italian. She was small, terrified, and running on pure adrenaline and apparently a talent for medieval warfare tactics. Fabiano shattered the window with his elbow, cleared the glass, started helping people through. Russo went first, weapon drawn, clearing the fire escape. The wounded bodyguard next, groaning in pain. Then Amber. Then the shot came from above, from the roof where someone had been waiting, patient and professional. The bullet caught Fabiano in the shoulder, spun him halfway around. He dropped his gun, staggered, caught himself against the window frame. Time did that thing again where it stopped meaning anything. Amber saw him fall, saw the blood, so much blood, dark and spreading across his white shirt, saw his face go pale, saw him try to stand and fail. The training kicked in. 3 years of watching her mother's nurses, of learning to stay calm when everything was falling apart, of being functional when the world ended. She grabbed him, dragged him with strength she didn't know she had, got him through the window onto the fire escape. The metal stairs rang with footsteps, attackers below, coming up. "Pressure," she said, her voice steady despite the terror. "I need to stop the bleeding." "Amber." "Shut up. I'm concentrating." She stripped off his jacket, then his shirt, revealing the wound, through and through, high on the shoulder. Missed the artery, thank God, but bleeding badly. She pressed her scarf against it, hard. He hissed in pain. "Congratulations," she said, her humor a lifeline against the panic. "You're not dying on my shift. I refuse to have that on my resume. Former employer, deceased from poor life choices." Despite the pain, despite the blood, despite everything, he laughed, weak but genuine. "Dio mio, you're insane. I'm resourceful. There's a difference." She tied the scarf tight, makeshift pressure bandage. "Can you move?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not really, no." Russo was back, his face grim. "Cars 2 blocks away. We move now or we don't move at all." They moved. It was a blur after that. Stumbling down fire escapes, through alleys that smelled like garbage and rain, Fabiano leaning on her more than she thought he would, trusting her with his weight, with his life. The attackers behind them, sirens in the distance, the city turning from sanctuary to battlefield. They made it to the car, a different one this time, something nondescript and fast. Russo drove like he was auditioning for Formula 1. Amber kept pressure on Fabiano's wound, her hands red with his blood, her mind eerily calm. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Red Hook Marine Terminal," Russo said grimly. "Old warehouse, one of the original family holdings." He glanced at Fabiano in the rearview mirror. "Capo, you good?" "Been better. Been worse." Fabiano's voice was strained but steady. He looked at Amber. "You threw Molotov cocktails. I was inspired. You saved Marco's life. I was helping. You're not what I expected. Is that a compliment or are you hallucinating from blood loss?" His smile was tired but real. "Both." The warehouse was exactly what it sounded like, massive, industrial, smelling of oil and old fish. Russo had called ahead. More of Fabiano's people were waiting, 6 men with guns and expressions that suggested they were done being polite about things. They carried Fabiano inside, laid him on a table that had probably seen worse things than emergency field medicine. Someone had brought a proper first aid kit, the military kind with sutures and antibiotics and painkillers that were definitely not over the counter. Amber cleaned the wound properly, stitched it with hands that barely shook, her years of watching her mother's medical procedures finally paying dividends she'd never wanted to use. "You're good at this," Fabiano said quietly, watching her work. "I'm motivated not to let you die." She tied off the last suture. "Also, you still owe me 3 months' salary and excellent health insurance. Can't collect if you're dead." Always thinking practically. Someone has to. Russo entered, phone in hand, his expression murderous. "Capo, we found Elena." "And?" "She's at her apartment, acting like nothing's wrong, but..." He pulled up something on his phone, showed Fabiano. We tracked the forgeries, the commission, the payments, everything. They all lead back to the same source. Amber leaned over to look. Bank transfers, encrypted messages, a trail of digital breadcrumbs that someone hadn't been careful enough to hide. And there, at the center of it all, was a name that made Fabiano's face go cold. Cristiano, he said quietly. The word was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of betrayal and fury, and something that might have been grief. Your cousin? Russo asked, though it wasn't really a question. My cousin. Fabiano's jaw clenched. He commissioned the forgeries, used Elena to authenticate them, tried to place tracking devices in my collection, then tried to kill me when it failed. He looked up at Russo, and his eyes were empty of everything except cold purpose. How long? Best we can tell? 2 years. Maybe more. He's been positioning himself to take over, talking to the other families, making alliances, building support. Russo's voice was grim. Capo, he's been planning a coup. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. Where is he? Fabiano asked quietly. Elena gave him up. He's at the old Pinto estate in Staten Island, the one your father left you. Russo's expression was dark. He's making a statement. Thinks he already won. Fabiano stood, moving carefully around the fresh stitches. Amber wanted to tell him to sit down, to rest, that he'd been shot less than an hour ago. But she saw his face and knew that nothing she said would matter. Gather, everyone, Fabiano said quietly. Everyone we trust, everyone loyal to my father's memory. We end this tonight. Capo, stasera. Tonight. He tried to kill me. He tried to kill her. His eyes found Amber's, and she saw something in them that was both terrifying and protective. That ends now. Amber should have been scared, should have asked to be taken somewhere safe, to be removed from whatever was about to happen. Instead, she stood. I'm coming with you. Amber, you said I'm the only witness you trust. That means you need me there. She lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of stubborn determination that had gotten her through Colombia, through 3 years of service work, through bullets and fire. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't tear your stitches. Doctor's orders. Fabiano stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Sei pazza. You're crazy. You're bleeding on my handiwork. We're both disasters. She grabbed her jacket. Let's go confront your treacherous cousin before I remember I'm supposed to be terrified. As they walked toward the cars, toward whatever ending this night would bring, Fabiano caught her hand. Squeezed once. A promise or a prayer. She couldn't tell which. Thank you, he said quietly, for not letting me die. Thank me when this is over, Amber replied. And you're buying me the most expensive dinner Manhattan has to offer. Somewhere without snipers or explosions. Deal. They drove toward Staten Island, toward the old Pinto estate, toward the final confrontation with betrayal that wore a familiar face. And Amber Rogers, scholar and accidental warrior, realized that some truths were worth more than survival. Some truths were worth everything. The Pinto estate in Staten Island looked like something out of a Gothic novel, all wrought iron gates and overgrown gardens, the kind of place where family secrets went to fester and occasionally murder people. The mansion itself was dark, except for lights blazing in the East Wing library, an invitation, a challenge. A stage set for the final act. He wants an audience, Russo muttered, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. Thinks he's already won. Maybe he has, Fabiano said quietly, his wounded shoulder bound tight beneath a fresh shirt. He'd refused painkillers, need to stay sharp, and the blood loss was making his face pale in the dashboard lights. Maybe this was always going to end here. Don't, Amber said sharply from the back seat. Don't you dare get philosophical on me. We're walking into what is very obviously a trap, and I need you focused, not composing your tragic final monologue. Despite everything, he smiled. Yes, doctor. They'd brought 6 men, all family, all loyal to Fabiano's father, all armed and looking like they'd welcome an excuse for violence. but Fabiano had been clear. This is between Cristiano and me. You're backup, not the main event. Amber had her phone in her pocket, recording app already running. Whatever happened in that library, there would be evidence, truth preserved even if they didn't survive to use it. Medieval scholars didn't run toward danger, she thought as they approached the mansion. They stayed in monasteries and complained about the quality of vellum. Why didn't I become a normal academic? Because normal academics didn't save mafia bosses from forgeries, and they definitely didn't fall for dangerous men with shoulder wounds and trust issues. Fall 4, her brain whispered. Really? We're calling it that now? Shut up, she told herself. Existential crisis later. Survival now. The front door was unlocked. Another message. Come in, I'm waiting. They moved through the house like ghosts, through a foyer with dusty chandeliers, past family portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their movement, up a grand staircase that creaked with age and secrets. The library door stood open. Light spilled out, warm and inviting and absolutely treacherous. Fabiano paused at the threshold, looked at Russo. 2 minutes. If shooting starts before then, it means diplomacy failed. Capo. 2 minutes, Fabiano repeated. Then, to Amber, stay behind me. Obviously, I'm small and squishy. You're large and recently bullet-resistant. He almost laughed. Then he walked into the library, and Amber followed, her phone recording everything in her pocket. Cristiano Pinto sat in a leather chair like it was a throne. He was younger than Fabiano, maybe 28, with the same dark hair and sharp features. But softer somehow, like a sculpture that hadn't been fully finished, handsome in a way that probably got him whatever he wanted until he encountered something that couldn't be charmed. He was also holding a gun, casually, like it was a glass of wine. Cugino, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Cousin. You look terrible. Someone shoot you? Someone tried. Fabiano moved further into the room, putting himself between Cristiano and Amber. Always protecting, always the shield. Your people, I assume. My people. Cristiano's smile widened. I like the sound of that. My people. Like I'm building something, which I am, actually. I'm building what should have been mine from the beginning. Papa left me the business. Papa left you everything. The charm cracked, revealing rage beneath. The business, the estate, the respect, the legacy. And what did I get? A monthly allowance and a seat at the children's table during family meetings. He stood, the gun now pointed more deliberately. I'm older than you were when you took over. Smarter, better educated, but you were his favorite, his heir, his perfect soldier son. So you tried to destroy me. Fabiano's voice was calm, but Amber could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his right hand hovered near his concealed weapon. The forgeries, the tracking devices, the assassination attempts, all because you're jealous. I'm realistic, Cristiano corrected. You're weak, Fabiano. You hire outsiders. His eyes flicked to Amber with contempt. You trust people who aren't blood? You try to legitimize what Papa built instead of expanding it. You're making us soft. I'm keeping us alive, Fabiano said quietly. Papa's methods worked in his time. This is different. This is surrender, Cristiano's voice rose. You've forgotten what we are, what this family was built on, blood and fear and power. He gestured with the gun. I'm going to remind them, starting with you. Amber's heart was hammering, but her hands were steady. The phone in her pocket was recording every word, every confession, every self-incriminating rant about assassination and betrayal. Just keep him talking, she thought. Give Russo time to position people. Give the recording time to upload to cloud storage. You commissioned the forgeries, Fabiano said. It wasn't a question. Used Elena to authenticate them. Planted tracking devices to map my collection. Elena was easy, Cristiano said with a shrug. Debt makes people flexible, and she's been in love with you for years, which made betraying you even sweeter for her. Got it, Amber thought. Confession to conspiracy, attempted murder, and being a general sociopath. That should hold up in court. If we survive to see a court. And when I didn't accept the documents? Fabiano pressed. Plan B, kill you, make it look like a rival family, step in as the grieving cousin who stabilizes everything. Cristiano's smile was poisonous. It would have worked perfectly if your little waitress hadn't stuck her nose where it didn't belong. Don't. Fabiano's voice carried a warning. What? Don't insult your pet academic, the girl who saved you with her useless degree? Cristiano's laugh was ugly. She's a weakness, Fabiano. The fact that you brought her here proves it. The old you would have locked her somewhere safe. The new you keep her close because you're soft. I keep her close because she's the only person who's been honest with me, Fabiano said quietly, which is more than I can say for family. The words hit like a physical blow. Cristiano's expression twisted into something ugly, hate and hurt and rage all mixed together. Then let's make this simple, he said, raising the gun. I kill you. I kill her. I tell everyone the rivals got to you before we could intervene. Tragic, heroic even. And I take what should have always been mine. Everything happened at once. Cristiano fired. Fabiano moved, trying to shield Amber, but she was already diving sideways, her years of being small and fast in crowded restaurants finally paying lethal dividends. The bullet missed them both, buried itself in the bookshelf. Priceless first editions exploded into confetti. Russo and the guards burst through the door, weapons drawn. Cristiano's people, because of course he had people hidden, emerged from behind furniture, from doorways, from shadows. The library became a war zone. Amber hit the floor behind a desk, her ears ringing from gunfire, her brain running on pure survival instinct. She could see Fabiano across the room, taking cover behind an overturned table, returning fire with cold precision despite his wounded shoulder. Russo was shouting orders. Someone was screaming, wounded, maybe dying. The smell of gunpowder filled the air like a toxic perfume. And then Cristiano was there, looming over Amber, his gun pointed at her face, his expression triumphant. You should have stayed invisible, he said. Amber's mouth opened. Her brain, running on terror and adrenaline and possibly divine intervention, switched languages. Tu si nucciardu, she said in perfect Sicilian. You're a coward. Nucciardu ka non sapi mancu como tradire bonu. A coward who doesn't even know how to betray properly. Cristiano froze, shock replacing rage. What? U menanu mi insegnò u siciliano, Amber continued, standing slowly, her hands raised but her voice steady. My grandfather taught me Sicilian. E mi disse che I traditori sono sempre I primi a morire. And he told me traitors are always the first to die. Perché I famiglia si ricorda sempre. Because family always remembers. She was stalling, buying time, using every scrap of linguistic knowledge her mother had drilled into her. And it was working. Cristiano was listening, confused by this waitress speaking his grandmother's dialect, this outsider who somehow knew the old words. Fabiano non è debole, Amber said quietly. Fabiano isn't weak. È abbastanza forte per fidarsi di cui non è sangue. He's strong enough to trust those who aren't blood. Tu non lo si, you're not. Shut up. Cristiano raised the gun. Fabiano appeared behind him like a vengeful ghost. Cristiano! His cousin turned. The gun swung toward Fabiano. They were 5 feet apart, close enough to see each other's faces, to recognize the family resemblance, to understand that this was the end of something that had started generations ago. Don't, Fabiano said quietly. Cugino, don't make me. Cristiano fired. Time did that crystalline thing where every second became hours. Amber saw the muzzle flash, saw Fabiano's body twist, saw him fall, saw blood, too much blood, always too much blood, spread across his chest. She screamed. Didn't remember starting, but sound was ripping from her throat as she launched herself at Cristiano with the fury of someone who'd spent 3 years being invisible and was done being silent. She tackled him, all 115 pounds of rage and terror and love she hadn't admitted to yet, and they went down hard. The gun skittered away. Russo was there instantly, pulling her off. restraining Cristiano with efficient brutality. But Amber didn't care about Cristiano anymore. She crawled to Fabiano, her hands immediately finding the wound, high chest, bleeding badly, his breathing shallow and wrong. "No, no, no," she heard herself saying, pressure on the wound, her hands red again, everything red again. "You don't get to die. You promised me dinner, expensive dinner. You can't die before you pay your debts, that's just bad business." His eyes opened, found hers. He tried to smile and managed something that was half grimace, half genuine amusement. "You ruined my business meeting," he murmured, his voice thread-thin. "I saved your life twice. You're welcome." Tears were streaming down her face, mixing with blood and gunpowder residue. "Stay awake. Stay with me. Please, Fabiano, per favore." "Amuretta," he whispered. "Little love. Don't you dare little love me and then die. That's cheating. That's emotional manipulation." Her voice broke. "You have to stay. I can't need you to know." His hand found hers, gripped with surprising strength. "You're not invisible. Never were. From the first moment. Saw you." "Shut up. Save your breath." "Ambulance is coming. Love you," he said quietly. Simple, final, true. "Had to say it." His eyes closed. "No!" Amber's scream tore through the library. "Fabiano! Fabiano!" Russo was there, phone to his ear, shouting for paramedics. Someone was doing chest compressions. Someone else was saying medical words that sounded like death sentences. And Amber held his hand, her brilliant mind that could spot forgeries and speak dead languages and survive bullets completely useless against the reality of the man she loved bleeding out on a library floor. "Please," she whispered, to God or fate or anyone listening, "please don't take him. Not now. Not like this." The sirens were getting closer, but Fabiano's hand in hers was getting colder, and Amber Rogers, who'd faced down assassins and betrayal and her own fear, finally understood that some truths were too painful to survive. 6 weeks later, the New York Times headline read, "Massive art forgery ring exposed. Federal investigation uncovers $150 million fraud scheme." The Wall Street Journal went with, "Renaissance document forgeries traced to international criminal network." Art News, always more dramatic, proclaimed, "The Waitress who saved the art world, how one scholar exposed a forgery empire." Amber ignored them all. She had better things to do than read about herself in the third person, like explaining to her mother why she was quitting her job at Il Palazzo. "You're doing what?" Dr. Elena Rogers sat in her sunny kitchen in Queens, looking healthier than she had in 3 years. The experimental treatment was working, slowly, imperfectly, but working. Her hair was growing back in silver streaks that she claimed made her look distinguished. "I'm taking a new position," Amber repeated, pouring them both tea with hands that no longer shook when she thought about bullets and blood. "Cultural consultant for a private collection. The pay is substantial." "How substantial?" Amber told her. Her mother choked on her tea. "That's not a salary. That's a lottery jackpot." Elena narrowed her eyes with the suspicious intelligence that had made her a formidable scholar. "Amber Margaret Rogers, what kind of private collection pays that kind of money? The kind that requires someone who can spot forgeries that fool everyone else?" Amber offered weakly. "And this has nothing to do with the very handsome Italian businessman whose life you saved, the one who's been sending flowers to this apartment every week for a month?" "He's being polite. I did prevent him from being murdered." Polite is a thank you card. Weekly flowers is something else entirely. Her mother's smile was knowing. "When do I meet him?" "Mom? If he's paying you that much and sending flowers, I'm meeting him. Those are the rules. I don't make them." "You literally just made that rule." "I'm dying. I'm allowed." At Amber's expression, Elena softened. "I'm joking, sweetheart. The treatment is working. I'm going to be around to embarrass you for years, which means I definitely want to meet this mysterious benefactor." Amber sighed. "Sunday dinner. But I'm warning you now, he's intense. Intense I can handle. Boring would be unforgivable. The Tribeca penthouse had been rebuilt. New windows, bulletproof, naturally. New security, enough cameras to make Big Brother jealous, and new artwork on the walls, each piece now authenticated by Amber herself. She'd spent the last 6 weeks doing nothing but reviewing Fabiano's collection. 42 pieces had been forgeries, some so sophisticated it had taken her days to find the flaws. 7 more had been authentic but altered, their provenance enhanced by careful fraud. The total loss, $73 million. The total prevented from future fraud, incalculable. Cristiano was in federal custody, charged with everything from conspiracy to attempted murder. Elena, the traitorous lawyer, had turned state's witness in exchange for a reduced sentence. The forgery ring had connections to 3 countries and included 2 respected academics who'd sold their credentials for cash. It was, as one FBI agent had told Amber, the biggest art fraud case we've seen in 20 years. And it had started because a waitress had spotted a backwards seal. Now that waitress stood on a balcony 42 floors above Manhattan, watching November rain start to fall over the city like a curtain closing on one act and opening on another. Behind her she heard the balcony door open. Footsteps. The familiar presence that still made her heart do complicated things. "You're thinking too loud," Fabiano said, coming to stand beside her. He'd healed well. The shoulder wound was now just a scar, a reminder he'd survived. The chest wound had been worse, requiring surgery and weeks of recovery that he'd endured with the patience of a caged tiger. "I can hear it from inside. I'm not thinking, I'm brooding. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Thinking is productive. Brooding is aesthetic." She glanced at him. He was wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, casual in a way that somehow made him more dangerous, not less. "How do you feel?" "Like I was shot twice and lived to complain about it." He smiled. "Thanks to you. Thanks to modern medicine and your apparently superhuman constitution, I just kept you conscious with threats and sarcasm. Your bedside manner needs work. I'm not a nurse. I'm a cultural consultant." She said the title with exaggerated importance. Very different skill set. "Is that what we're calling it? What else would we call it?" He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the expensive one that still made her slightly dizzy. "We could call it what it is. You work for me because you're brilliant. You stay because you want to. Presumptuous. Accurate." His hand came up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You could have left 6 weeks ago, could have taken any position. The Met called, Christie's called, 3 different universities called, but you're still here. The pay is excellent. The company isn't terrible either. The company got me shot at. The company took a bullet for you." His expression was serious now, the humor fading into something deeper. "I meant what I said. In the library, before I passed out dramatically." Amber's heart was doing acrobatics. "You were bleeding out. People say things." "I meant it," he repeated firmly. "Every word. You're not invisible, Amber, you never were. From the moment you spoke up in that suite, from the moment you said this is fake when everyone else was lying." He took her hand, laced their fingers together. "I knew you were extraordinary." "I'm really not," she said quietly. "I'm just someone who's good at spotting when things are wrong." "You're someone who's brave enough to speak truth to power, even when it costs you everything." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Do you know how rare that is?" "Apparently rare enough to get me a 6-figure salary and weekly death threats from collectors whose pieces I've debunked. Also rare enough to make a man who trusted no one learn to trust again." He pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "I love you, Amber Rogers. I loved you when you corrected my experts. I loved you when you threw Molotov cocktails. I loved you when you kept me conscious by insulting my life choices." His smile was soft now, vulnerable. "I love you. Present tense. Ongoing condition. No expiration date." The rain was falling harder now, turning the city into a watercolor painting. The lights of Manhattan glittered like scattered stars, like promises, like the future spreading out before them. "I love you too," Amber whispered, and it was the easiest truth she'd ever spoken. "Even though you're a mafia boss with control issues and a talent for getting shot." "Former mafia boss," he corrected. "I'm going legitimate. You're a terrible influence." "I'm an excellent influence. You're just not used to having a conscience." "I'm not used to having you." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "Don't leave." "Not planning on it." "Someone has to keep you from buying fake Botticellis." "Is that the only reason?" "That and the excellent health insurance." She smiled. "And possibly because I'm in love with you, but mostly the health insurance." He laughed, genuine, warm, the sound of a man who'd survived bullets and betrayal and his own demons to find something unexpected. Joy, hope, a future that didn't involve looking over his shoulder constantly. From inside, she heard the soft clink of glasses. Russo had left champagne, because apparently even deadly serious consigliere approved of romance when it involved people who'd bled together. Fabiano retrieved the glasses, returned to the balcony where Amber waited in the rain. He handed her one, kept the other, and raised it in a toast. "To the waitress who said this is fake," he said solemnly. Amber raised her glass, her smile bright enough to rival the city lights. "To the mafia boss who listened." They drank. The champagne was exceptional, probably cost more than her old monthly rent. Everything in Fabiano's world was excessive, expensive, edged with danger. She wouldn't have it any other way. He set down his glass, took hers, set it aside. Then he pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it tasted like rain and champagne and promises kept. It tasted like truth, messy and complicated, and absolutely worth it. The city sparkled below them, 8 million people living their lives, none of them knowing that on a balcony in Tribeca, a scholar and a reformed criminal were writing their own ending, or maybe their beginning. Because the truth was, Amber Rogers had stopped being invisible the moment she chose to speak. And Fabiano Pinto had stopped being alone the moment he chose to listen. Everything else, the money, the danger, the headlines, was just details. What mattered was this: a woman brave enough to tell the truth, and a man wise enough to value it more than anything money could buy. As the rain fell and the city lights shimmered and the champagne went flat because they were too busy kissing to drink it, Amber thought about her mother's words from years ago. "Truth doesn't negotiate, Amber, it simply is." She'd been right, and the truth was simple. Love, like authentic art, couldn't be forged. It could only be recognized, protected, and cherished. Everything else was just expensive fakery. 3 months later, the Times ran a smaller article on page B7. Fabiano Pinto, Italian-American businessman and art collector, announced today the establishment of the Elena Rogers Foundation for Renaissance Studies, a fully funded scholarship program for students pursuing authentication and preservation of historical documents. The foundation will be directed by Dr. Amber Rogers, whose expertise recently exposed one of the largest art fraud rings in recent history. When asked for comment, Mr. Pinto stated simply, "Truth is worth protecting. This is how we protect it." The article included a photo, Fabiano and Amber at the foundation's opening, his arm around her waist, her head tilted toward his shoulder, both of them smiling at something off camera. They looked, a casual observer might note, like people who'd survived something terrible together and come out the other side stronger. They looked, a more astute observer might recognize, like people in love. They looked, Amber's mother would later say while framing the article, like they belonged together. And for once, everyone was telling the truth. Amber started invisible and ended up seen. Fabiano started alone and ended up loved. And you? You just experienced a story about truth, courage, and the kind of love that's worth fighting for. If you want more stories that make you feel something, stories that remind you why romance and danger and wit make the perfect combination, then subscribe to Bella's Stories. We're building a community of people who believe in powerful storytelling. Join us. Click subscribe, explore our other videos, and let's keep telling stories that matter. See you in the comments. Tell me your favorite moment from this story.